Ascension Day traditionally is the day when we mark the departure of Jesus of Nazareth, some 40 days roughly after his bodily resurrection. Let's talk about what we know. As you know me well enough by now, I'm not talking about anything in the book of Acts until I talk about the author, who he was, why he wrote what he wrote, and in what historical setting all this happened. So, Acts is commonly attributed to Luke, the same author as the Gospel of Luke, and while good questions and criticisms of that view exist, it matters less in this context than it did for the Gospel of John I spoke to you about previously. So I don't need to have as firm of an opinion on it. In either case, both works are addressed to a man named Theophilus, about whom we know functionally nothing. We know that Luke was a physician, and that he claimed to be a traveling companion to the Apostle Paul. If that is true, it means that Luke never met Jesus and put together his entire gospel and the book of Acts based on his own investigation of the events after the fact. That makes Luke an historian of sorts, and that does matter, because when we think of an historian, we think of people who look through history and, to the best of their ability, recreate and reconstruct historical events with as much factual and evidence-based accuracy as possible. If that's what you are thinking when you think of historians in the first century or today, I have some very bad news for you all about bias. Historians, to a more subtle degree now, but very flagrantly then, editorialize and cherry-pick events to include in their chronicles for reasons that range from patriotism to economics to theology. Luke's gospel, for example, includes intimate knowledge of Mary's internal emotional state, precise details of Jesus' conversation with the literal devil in the wilderness, exact quotes that are hundreds of words long around Jesus' teaching, and in Luke chapter 1, he justifies all this by saying that he has carefully investigated everything from the beginning, citing precisely 0 of his sources. In the modern vernacular, what Luke is saying here is that his source is "trust me, bro." Again, not to put him down, almost all historians of the day did the same thing. Josephus did it, Herodotus did it. Therefore, when we read the Gospel of Luke or the Acts of the Apostles, we need to make sure that we are reading it from the perspective of someone who may or may not have been there, may or may not have credible sources for his knowledge, and is explicitly writing a history for the purpose of strengthening an already held belief that Jesus is a divine being. So, with great care, I will approach today's passage about Ascension as if this is a theological work more than it is an historical one. So, if this is theological and not necessarily literal, then what are we to make of the ascension of Jesus? I wish to highlight a few things. The first is the question of the apostles. Are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? They think the work is done. Jesus has died, Jesus has risen. Now we get to experience a new golden age, a heaven on earth, right? Jesus' reply is to put them to work, spreading the gospel throughout the world. You want heaven on earth, you need to work for it. Then, Jesus leaves them, ascending up into heaven. Thinking theologically, we are witnessing here an elevation of this man, his teachings, his ideas, not only to heaven, but as we learn through the rest of Scripture, to the throne of heaven itself. This is not only an event, it is a call. We too must ascend, must elevate ourselves and our species with the same ideas Jesus had for us. Then there are the angelic beings to drive home the earlier point. He's coming back. This same Jesus, this being of love, this call to love your neighbor as yourself, this reaching out to heal the sick, house the homeless, preserve life, give generously, build community, open our doors, and find the humanity worth loving in everyone is coming back. When? When we work for it. When we build it here. 2,000 years later, and sometimes it can feel like all our efforts to ascend have not really gotten us very far. In the first few centuries after the Ascension, Christians spread throughout the Roman Empire, eventually inventing orphanages, hospitals, and things that we take for granted to this day. But so much darkness and death has also been wrought by Christians and other faiths alike throughout that time. For all our efforts and all our progress, we remain a largely cynical and selfish species. Philosophers throughout our history, from Aristotle to C.S. Lewis, have all noticed and observed that we humans have a tendency to know better, yet do worse. And the explanations for that moral failure have ranged from angry gods to a sinful, evil heart. But we keep coming back to the struggle with this concept of good versus evil, almost as if we ate from a tree that granted that knowledge to us. Aristotle and C.S. Lewis and everyone in between knew that we have a struggle within us between our selfish primal desires and our thoughtful and genuine desire to rise above those urges for the good of the community. But short of myths about sin in the Garden of Eden or shadowy voices speaking to us to commit harm, none of them really knew why. We do. This is why. Warning, sidebar. Science lesson incoming. This is called a prefrontal cortex. Everyone in this room has one. You're born with it barely developed, and over the course of your childhood and adolescence, this piece of your brain grows and develops, reaching full maturity at around age 25. This part of your brain is responsible for rational thought, decision-making, moral reasoning, among many other things. Those of you who thought that this was right brain versus left brain are relying on old, inaccurate science. That was never true, though many thought it was. Actual rationality arises largely from here. This right here is why we ask, why? This down here is your limbic system. Our species has had that for a very long time. This part of your brain connects to a nerve in your gut when you still feel it clench up when you're anxious, angry, or afraid. Memory arises from here, and with memory, the concept of trauma and trauma responses. This is how our lizard ancestors skittered off of the rock when a shadow of a bird flew above them. This is how our monkey ancestors leapt into the trees and fled when leopards attacked. And this is how our Neanderthal ancestors ran from that saber-toothed tiger. This, right here. This is our animal brain. This is our human brain. This is our animal brain. This is our human brain. This is our animal brain. The reason why this matters is because as children, when the human part of our brain is still growing and developing, we learn to interact with our world primarily with our limbic system. We don't think through right and wrong very well until later in childhood, or even later. And we govern ourselves almost entirely without the higher, more complex thought of the prefrontal lobe. But as we transition to adulthood, we gain the ability, but not necessarily the motivation, to switch to running our lives with our prefrontal cortex. If we don't put in the conscious work to understand this, and to deliberately order our thinking, then we allow our limbic system to lead us, making decisions about our lives. And our prefrontal cortex will follow, using its complex thought process to try to justify what we just did. Because our limbic system will rev up whenever we feel like something might be a danger. And it does not know, it cannot know the difference between a late rent payment, an upset spouse, and a ticked-off rhinoceros. It also does not know, it cannot know the difference between right and wrong. Everyone in this room has either made decisions poorly because of this, or they know people who have made decisions poorly because of this. You see people do things and make decisions that are destructive to themselves and to others because their limbic system tells them that they feel threatened or insecure in some way, and then turn around and say stuff that is straight bonkers to justify it. You've seen people get addicted to drugs, ruin relationships, destroy families, hoard wealth, start wars, vote for politicians that use police instead of compassion to deal with homelessness. You've seen people respond to conflict by getting angry, shutting down, running away, or walking on eggshells around someone because they've taken on responsibility for that other person's feelings. Maybe some of this feels familiar because you are recognizing behavior in your own life that you know has hurt you or the people around you. All of this is because people live with their limbic system in the driver's seat. And this is why Ascension Day, after 2,000 years of trying, eludes us. This has implications that are enormous. And here's my big swing for today's sermon. Traumatized people exist. Fearful people exist. Angry people exist. Evil people do not. Evil people do not exist. I am standing in front of a congregation that includes people in this room whose parents beat Hitler. And I am telling you that evil people do not exist. I know it's a big swing. Walk with me on this. Imagine a world in 1895 where we understood this, and we built our society around this knowledge. And because of that, a fully funded mental health care system teamed up with a mental health care professional and a social worker to identify a 6-year-old child named Adolf Hitler and intervened in the life of a traumatized child to help that child reprocess trauma and achieve the awareness that I'm talking about. Do we still have World War II? Kick it back 50 years earlier. Do we still have World War I? We need to understand this. We need to build or rebuild our society, our elementary school curriculum around this. We need to build our medical and mental health facilities. We need to build our families around this knowledge. We need to notice this in ourselves when we respond to something in an unhealthy way. We need to notice when our limbic systems try to take over to keep us safe. And we need to put in the work to train ourselves to keep our consciousness thoughtful and reflective. We need to notice in others when they fall into this very human habit, and we need to understand why someone in our lives might be acting the way they do, because that knowledge will drive us to compassion and a desire to help. Evil can't be fixed. It can only be opposed, it can be fought, it can be destroyed. I didn't actually write this in my sermon because it just happened last night. I went to a Lord of the Rings marathon. People are familiar with this. The idea that J.R.R. Tolkien, a very Catholic man, had that evil could be this thing that can go into this destroyable object, and if you just deal with that, then everything will be fine. It's a lovely story, very well written, probably the best film adaptation ever made. But it's not helpful when we want to build our society around it. If we choose to continue upholding narratives around evil people, I can guarantee you that many, many unhealthy choices will continue to be made. Many personal lives will be hindered because of it. And more than that, I can guarantee you that roughly once every 2 generations, we're going to have to spend tremendous, horrific amounts of human blood to defeat the next global fascist. Whether it be Hitler in Germany, Napoleon in France, perhaps some emperor in China, maybe someone in the White House. It could even happen here in Canada. Arguably, with our history of residential schools, it did happen here in Canada. On the other hand, if we stop talking about evil people and start treating trauma and training ourselves, our neighbors, our children to understand this, to gain self-awareness, to accept the work of being a human being as the work to notice the mechanisms, the biological mechanisms within us that cause fear, and to respond rationally and lovingly to it, we will arm ourselves with the knowledge and will to solve homelessness, to cure disease, to still the weapons of war, to bring into this world the ascension that the angels promised would one day return. We can stand on the golden shores of the heaven we will create with a global community of all peoples, languages, cultures, orientations, and we can create that bond of love with everyone. Not everyone is willing, but those that are willing are also able. The will to grow this is the only ingredient necessary, and that willingness can be taught. The younger, the better. Would you see the promise of Jesus' return fulfilled? Would you see the ideas of Jesus spread across this planet, banishing pain and curse everywhere it goes? Would you see a community of faith, faith in our own ascension, grow and heal and love? It's Ascension Day. Let us elevate ourselves, our families, our communities, our nations, our world. Thank you very much.